Welcome to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden, broadcasting to you live on this Sunday morning from the Ottawa area. Thanks for joining me today. Hit piece, can you say hit piece? Can you say smear campaign? We've got lots to report this morning. I noticed this piece last night, and I want to share this with you because this is media reporting at its worst. We'll be back in mere moments.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
Your home is your castle. We're calling on the government to introduce and immediately pass the Stand on Guard law.
But we also need to resolve to resist.
You may recall I showed this to you yesterday from Pierre Poilievre's news conference, and I don't know where to begin because this was reported by some outlets, independent media so-called, as Pierre Poilievre saying fake news. He'd never said anything about fake news. The story was about how Poilievre reacted to a very strange question with the right response about, no, I don't support identity politics. And forget the clickbait that was out there saying he lashed at the reporter and he attacked the reporter and attacked the story as fake news. It didn't happen. And I'll explain why it didn't happen in a minute.
Question. Global News with a question from David Akin from our Ottawa Bureau. In the very well with voters in most demographics, pardon me, but you seem to struggle to win support among older women. Do you have some thoughts on how to address that particular demographic of women 50 plus?
Well, I don't believe in breaking the country down by demographics. I believe in working for every Canadian of every age and every gender and every race. I think we have to stop dividing our country into categories. Every Canadian, regardless of their age, should enjoy peace and security in their homes, should be able to afford food when they go to the grocery store, should know that their children and grandchildren will be able to get a job and buy a home. That was the promise of this country.
Okay, so you may recall I said that was a question from David Akin, but David Akin wasn't there. That was not David Akin asking the question because I know David Akin. I worked with him at Sun News, and that wasn't his voice. But here's what David Akin did with that response, and this is quite fascinating because he went back and did a story, and I couldn't believe the contention here. They're saying, or David Akin is saying, that Pierre Poilievre is doing poorly amongst women over 50 in terms of voting intention and in terms of the last election, how they voted. All right, that might be true. But he then jumps, he makes a huge leap in logic or illogic and says it's because Pierre Poilievre was wearing muscle shirts or T-shirts and he was looking so buff that women over 50 didn't want to vote for him. They only vote for politicians in suits, ties, and white shirts. Let's watch this.
In the 2025 election, the Conservative Party won the highest popular vote in the modern party's history, but still lost to the Liberals. One reason, women, especially women over 50.
There's a huge gap in the number of women and men who say they have a favorable view of him.
Indeed, some polls found Poilievre trailed Liberal leader Mark Carney by 25 points among women over 50, right on the eve of the vote. And that's a gap that pollsters like John Rowe says needs to be overcome if the party wants to form government.
The group that's most likely to vote is older Canadians, much more so than younger Canadians, and especially women and older women are very likely to vote.
One option to appeal to women over 50, develop some new policy approaches.
Women compared to men over time have been much more concerned about healthcare. And I think that is an issue where the Conservative Party is not viewed as very strong on.
Another, change Poilievre's tone and his image. And that's something that's happening.
All right, we went through this before, didn't we? When Pierre Poilievre took off his glasses, got toned up at the gym, started wearing more T-shirts, more short sleeve shirts, to show off his new muscles. Yeah, he's been there before. Now though, apparently to appeal to women over 50 who, once again, apparently are turned off by muscular men in t-shirts. Pierre Poilievre is going to change his image again, or is in the process of changing his image again. This is so ridiculous. I can't tell you how ridiculous this is, because why isn't global news focused on how Mark Carney keeps changing his image? Remember during the election campaign, the United States and Donald Trump are existential threats to Canada. And I'll have more to say about this in a minute, but this is incredible.
Like John Rowe says needs to be overcome if the party wants to form.
Been much more concerned about healthcare, and I
Poilievre's tone and his image, and that's something that's happening right now. Before the election, Poilievre showed off a muscular torso in a tight t-shirt while campaigning on shop floors and in warehouses. Since the election, he's still campaigning on shop floors and in warehouses, but the t-shirt is gone in favor of a suit, often a tie, and a crisp white-collared shirt.
Crisp white-collared shirt, suit and tie. Are you telling me that Pierre Poilievre did not wear suits, ties, and crisp white shirts until after this by-election win? Or when did this start? This is a ridiculous contention. And we'll get to Angus Reid in a minute here. But I really see something sinister at work here. I really do. But we'll get back to this, as ridiculous as it is. But once again, why isn't global news focused on Mark Carney changing his image from the tough guy during the federal election who's going to go head-to-head, toe-to-toe with Donald Trump? Remember that? He's going to go elbows up. Remember that? Yeah. So after the election, suddenly Mark Carney changes his image. And he's no longer at war with Donald Trump. The United States is no longer an existential threat. We have a great free trade agreement with the United States. He just loves Donald Trump. He's highly supportive of Donald Trump once he's won the election. Changed his image. That's what global news and the mainstream media should be focused on. How Mark Carney won the election under false pretenses. That's changing your image. That's what happens when you misrepresent who you really are in front of the Canadian people. Now, Poilievre, whether he wears a t-shirt or a suit, give me a break. And once again, I'm not a propagandist for the Conservative Party of Canada or Pierre Poilievre, but when I see a silly news story, when I see an issue that's not an issue, when I see something like this that's meant to distract you from Mark Carney's image changing, then I say we need to expose this. We really do need to expose this. Let's watch the end of this.
For a politician who once led campaign rallies with this slogan.
With boots, not suits. Boots, not suits.
For his part, Poilievre says he's not giving that gender gap much thought.
I don't believe in breaking the country down by demographics. I believe in working for every Canadian. Of every age and every gender and every race.
And that's something you'd sort of expect a politician to say, but here's a data point for Conservatives to consider. When Andrew Scheer became party leader in 2016, Angus Reid, the pollster, found that 36% of women voters said the Conservative Party does not represent me. 36% back in 2016. Now that number has now risen to 53% under Poilievre. 53% of women voters who say the Conservative Party does not represent me. David Akin.
Yes, David Akin. And in a minute, I'm going to show you why David Akin might still have an axe to grind with Pierre Poilievre, because there's a very famous moment in the House of Commons when David Akin has a meltdown during a news conference with Pierre Poilievre. And we'll show that in a minute. But what's with Angus Reid here obsessing about the women's vote? Well, it seems just before Abacus Data released its poll saying the Conservatives had pulled ahead of the Liberals, they put a poll out saying half of Canadians would be ashamed to call Pierre Poilievre Prime Minister. And that's from Angus Reid. Is there a connection here? Maybe. once again, maybe it's quite true that Pierre Poilievre did not score as high as he could have or should have with women over 50. But are women over 50 repelled by Pierre Poilievre because he looks healthy and in good shape and because he occasionally wears a t-shirt? Or are they really repelled by the fact that Pierre Poilievre can address blue-collar workers, union people, and talk about boots, not suits? Is that offensive to women over 50? This is entirely concocted nonsense. And the mainstream media does it all the time because they don't want you asking about Mark Carney's 103 conflicts of interest. They don't want you asking about Mark Carney and Brookfield Assets not paying taxes in Canada. They don't want you to ask about Mark Carney absolutely caving to the United States after he said he was going to be the tough guy. No, talk about Pierre Poilievre and his t-shirts. That's what they want you to talk about. And it's outrageous. But let's have a little trip down memory lane here with Pierre Poilievre having a news conference. I'm going to show you two versions of it. I'll show you the front version of Pierre Poilievre speaking. Then we'll see David Akin absolutely having a meltdown at this news conference. And I'm wondering, is this why David Akin wants to obsess over women over 50 not liking Pierre Poilievre?
Here we are today with 40-year highs in inflation, where Canadians are spending more just to feed themselves, to heat their homes, and to buy a home in the very first place. The reason that, So I mean, we have basically a liberal heckler who snuck in here today to, well, right. Are you going to let me make my misstatement?
From the guy who actually reported first on the Prime Minister breaking the law.
Yeah. Are you going to let me make my statement?
Ask a question. Say yes.
I've actually never seen you heckling the Prime Minister.
Ask Minister
Never seen you heckling the Prime Minister. Look, bottom line is this. Yes, I will taking two questions at the very end. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start my statement again, and hopefully this time without interruption from the liberal heckling gathering here, and we'll speak directly to Canadians so that they can hear what the new leader of the opposition has to say.
Okay, so that scene is right after Pierre Poilievre won the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada and became the official leader of the opposition. So here's the shot. I probably should have just shown this one, but I just love this because yes, there is a camera angle of David Akin doing his performance.
I appreciate it. Appreciate your presence here today. Before I begin, let me just say that. Thank you very much. I'm being heckled here by. Thank you very much for your congratulations. Thank you very much for your questions. I'm going to begin my remarks now.
But will you take some questions afterwards?
Justin Trudeau is out of touch, and Canadians are out of money. The cost of government is driving up the cost of living. $500 billion of inflationary deficits have bid up the cost of the goods we buy and the interest that Canadians pay. The cost for workers and businesses to produce the goods that we buy. On top of that, Trudeau proposes yet more spending to bid up costs even further. The more he spends, the more things cost. It is just inflation. Their homes and to buy a home in the very first place. The reason that So I mean, we have basically a liberal heckler who snuck in here today to. Well,
I'm the chief political correspondent of that organization.
Are you going to let me make my misstatement?
Me from the guy who actually reported first on the Prime Minister breaking the law.
Yeah. Are you going to let me make my statement?
Ask a question. Say yes.
I've actually never seen you heckling the Prime Minister.
Ask Minister Bear back in the day.
The Prime Minister. Look, bottom line is this.
Are you going to take some questions at the end of this statement?
Yes, I will be taking two questions at the very end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to start my statement again.
I think there might still be some hard feelings there from Mr. Akin. And as I said, I wouldn't call David Akin a good friend. I worked with him at Sun News, but I found that behavior at the time very, very strange. And just as I find this news story very strange, because he had a question posed to Pierre Poilievre at this news conference. Pierre Poilievre, I thought, answered the question perfectly. I thought he answered the question as conservatives, small c, as well as large c, wanted him to answer it. Don't focus on identity politics. Don't focus on demographics. Focus on the fact that you believe all Canadians are equal under the law. I thought that was a great response. And I'm sure he wasn't expecting that question, but he answered it well. So David Akin went back and put the story together, regardless of how Pierre Poilievre responded to that question, and wanted to make sure that his point that somehow women over 50 don't like Pierre Poilievre because he's not wearing suits 100% of the time. And that to me was just a moment of outrage. And once again, we see the mainstream media focusing on, shall we say, issues that don't matter and inventing problems. Because, yeah, they want Poilievre out. There's no question about that. I don't know who they want in. Doug Ford? Jason Kenney? It's interesting to see. Wanted to thank my good friend Mark Nixon, who's been on the show, for this little post yesterday. And this is incredible to me because this is going to affect my area. Now, a lot of people aren't even aware that Roundup is being sprayed over forests. And of course, it's well known that if you interact with Roundup and you're not wearing protective gear, it's potentially very dangerous. I'll only put it that way. It poses a health hazard. So why are they spraying this all over the forest? And does it potentially create or act as a catalyst, at least, for wildfires, for forest fires? I think this is a question we need answered, because clearly we are getting double talk from all levels of government about the origin of these wildfires. They don't want to talk about arson. They don't want to talk about the fact that arsonists essentially have to commit 3 offenses before they even consider putting them in jail. And they want to keep talking about climate change, although the official statistics don't even list climate change as a source of wildfires, as a cause of wildfires. So this is absolutely beyond reason. But that's what we're dealing with. Now, want to talk about what we're doing tomorrow, and this is a bit of a sneak preview. As you know, I have been following the Ostrich farm issue for quite some time. We've had the Universal Ostrich Farms spokeswoman, Katie Pasanick, on the show 3 or 4 times now. She'll be back again tomorrow, along with Viva Fry, David Fry, who, of course, is one of the other people on independent media who's been covering this story. And this has been ignored, unfortunately. The story has been ignored from a lot of podcasters, a lot of so-called independent media who won't touch it because the Conservative Party of Canada hasn't taken a stand on it. And that's the only reason why. Because they don't want to upset the apple cart. They don't want to say something that would possibly implicate the official parties in this. So Viva Fry has been doing a lot of work on it. I've been doing a lot of work on it. And Rebel News has been doing a lot of work on this. And it's essential we keep people focused on the story, because this is about not just 399 ostriches being killed. It's about the ability and the presumed right of the government, or the Canadian Food Inspection Agency specifically, to invade your property, to steal your property, steal your livestock, and kill it. Because it's all supposedly based on science, and it's not. So the CBC, of course, is the state broadcaster. The CBC will say and do anything to buttress government programs, government policy, especially when that government is liberal and that government is run by Justin Trudeau or Mark Carney. So CBC hasn't disappointed us. They put together a so-called fact check on the ostrich farm. And tomorrow I'm going to have Viva Fry on the program with me to discuss this hit piece disguised as a fact check and to discuss why it's really inadequate. And there are holes throughout this, but I'm going to show it to you today. We're going to show it just tomorrow. We're going to show just the CBC report. Viva Fry and myself will be commenting on it. We're going to bring Katie in about 15, 20 minutes into the show, and she'll be commenting on it live tomorrow at 10 o'clock to 10:30 or 10:45, thereabouts. And we're going to have a look at this. The three of us are going to critique this piece. But here's the CBC piece interspiced with some of our own material that contradicts everything CBC is saying in this. I can't emphasize enough how horrible the CBC is when it's doing this, because it's pretending to do a fact check, but what it's doing is defending government policy, and government policy is bankrupt in this area. There is absolutely no reason to call this herd of birds. Absolutely none. And they know it. The government knows it. The Food Inspection Agency knows it. And a lot of other people know it now. But let's have a look at this piece, and I'll comment afterwards.
Farm in BC has received a lot of love from Dr. Oz, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and a lot of other supporters. They all want to save a flock of 400 ostriches on a BC farm. But there's a catch. The birds were in contact with a deadly virus, H5N1, a type...
We don't even know if they were. We don't even know if the birds were in touch with the buds were in touch with a deadly virus. And by the way, this reporter I just find incredibly annoying. But we don't know that. And as we'll discover later, the farm can't even test the birds. It's against the law. How crazy is that?
Of avian flu. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency ordered the birds to be culled because of an outbreak in December of last year, where 69 of 468 ostriches died. That order led to a legal fight between the CFIA and the owner, Universal Ostrich. They say the ostriches shouldn't be culled because the remaining birds have survived the outbreak and could be studied. Since then, a number of claims have been made about the birds, including that they are unique in surviving H5N1. I asked an infectious disease veterinarian about that.
As expected, not everyone dies with influenza when it comes to ostriches. Different species have different responses to it, and we don't expect all individuals to die. And it probably worked its way through. The challenge is we don't know that, and influenza can circulate in individuals without causing signs of disease.
But during court hearings earlier this year, the owner pleaded their case, claiming that the birds have herd immunity.
Yeah, there you go. For each healthy ostrich tested, $200,000 fine, plus 6 months in jail. So what's going on here? And we have a veterinarian? I thought veterinarians were there to help and assist animals to live. And I wonder what's going on with this very strange news story. Yes, okay, let's get to the next. Yes.
A tough claim to prove.
Well, think about us with influenza, right? We can get influenza a variety of times. Sure, you've survived influenza. You may be protected to some degree, but you certainly can't say this group of birds is never going to get influenza again.
Meanwhile,
the
former TV host and current administrator for the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Dr. Mehmet Oz, has claimed that the birds hold
huge scientific value to the global community
because they have survived the virus. But a virologist I spoke to said this wouldn't be new research.
People have done experimental studies infecting ostriches with H5N1 and other avian influenza subtypes So you wouldn't really be learning necessarily anything new. So that part has certainly been overstated by Dr. Oz.
And other Trump officials like US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote in a letter to the CFIA that says he believes significant scientific knowledge may be garnered from following the ostriches in a controlled environment. But is that actually possible?
It's very difficult to test for influenza antibodies in almost any species, because we've all been infected with flu so many times. So the tests you have to use to try to address some of the technical issues with this often require live virus in a containment laboratory. And I'm quite certain that the ostrich farm does not have access to that.
Survivors probably have antibodies in them, just like you have antibodies if you've gotten through flu. So there's not really anything too unique about that. There have been a lot of comment about, how these are important for research, valuable for research, but no one's actually ever said what. Right? What are we actually going to get out of these individuals? And
this is so feeble. So we kill them because they may at one point get avian flu. And once again, we're not even 100% sure what they had.
And what value is there versus risk?
That risk is why the CFIA has ordered the birds to be culled in the first place. H5N1 strain of avian influenza is currently being monitored worldwide. And while it mainly affects birds, it can spread to other animals and humans. BC has already been largely affected by a spread of avian flu, with over 8 million birds impacted. There was also one human case of H5N1 in BC earlier this year that required critical care.
Talked as a whole family, and we were like, you know what? This is completely wrong, and we shouldn't be killing healthy birds, especially when they're for research. They're using my daughter's blood for research as well, through the research of the biobank, through Children's Hospital, and in, I believe it's Toronto.
The biggest thing that sticks out with us is the news, and certain media outlets like to throw in the 13-year-old child at the end of whatever they're trying to talk about for like any kind of virus type things.
In hospital. Along with some cases in the US, one resulted in death. The experts I spoke to say that the more the virus is spread, the more it could mutate and further affect livestock and humans.
Every time it jumps into a mammal, or especially jumps into a person, it can change. And the big concern would be is if it combines with a mammalian virus. That's how we get pandemic flu viruses.
The CFIA says the response to H5N1 is an approach known as stamping out. That response follows the CFIA's agreement with the World Organization for Animal Health.
Canada is party to trade agreements, which essentially means that if there is an outbreak of H5N1 bird flu on a poultry farm, which ostriches are considered poultry, then the first line response to that is by culling the entire flock. And the stamping out policy itself is really required because this is the only way to prevent H5N1 from spreading.
And we have to educate ourselves on how H5N1 operates, what effects it has, how we have had thousands of people here at our farm, and we are all okay, and that antibodies exist. We should be carrying around antibody cards, not vaccination cards. We should be able to be proof of antibodies that we all carry. If this was such a great threat, we wouldn't have our beaches open all summer. We wouldn't have had our lakes open all summer. We wouldn't have had our children and our families swimming in the lakes with the migratory ducks and the birds. And here we are with the best opportunity in Canada to create the change that we all deserve.
And when it does spread, especially to certain species of poultry, especially chickens and turkeys, it really wipes out the entire flock in a pretty gruesome way.
The experts I spoke to say culling is the typical method used when fighting an outbreak like this, but they say this case does raise questions about whether culling is the only option.
Is when avian flu went through that herd, it did kill 20% of them, but it didn't kill 80% of them. So maybe there is something to learn from whether there's an immunity or some kind of vaccine that could be developed as a result of having that flock survive. I think that maybe we have to think about different ways to do animal husbandry and animal safety, and why not try a different approach? So I'm open-minded.
If you had a farm that said, okay, I've got influenza here, we're going to report this right away. We think we can avoid a cull. We want to talk about this. And while we're doing this, we're going to do everything possible to contain this virus. I can get on board with that. This situation is different, though.
And Weiss says this case is different because according to court documents, the ostriches were in open pens with free access to wild birds and animals. Even after quarantine orders were put in place, inspectors noted wild animals were interacting with the ostriches and other safety measures weren't followed.
They've been posting pictures of themselves with the birds without PPE. They've invited a convoy to the farm that's quarantined. This is not a situation where you get confidence that they're doing what they can do to contain the disease while you're fighting this.
Weiss says this particular case.
So you'll see that whole report tomorrow before David Fry joins me and Katie later joins the two of us to discuss this. But it comes down to, once again, this is an incredible piece because this farm did everything possible and is trying to do everything possible. Nobody's been infected in over 220 days. No bird, no animal, no human being. So what are they talking about? And the farm wants to test the birds. They will be fined and jailed if they do that. This is how ridiculous this is. This case has drawn global support from people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Health and Human Services Secretary in the U.S., Dr. Oz, and others. And like I say, this is not about just 399 ostriches. It's about the government's attempts to once again use the situation to exercise authoritarian control over people, over Canadians, over farmers, over you and I. That's what's going on here. That's what's big. So that's about all I have today. I'm going to come back with a few more comments. Have a look at our merchandise. I'll be back momentarily. Yes, have a look at the story. Appreciate your patronage. It's much appreciated. Hope you have a great Sunday. Go to church, synagogue, tabernacle, anywhere you want to go to worship God. I'm going to church this morning. I thank God it's a beautiful day and I can do that. Join me again tomorrow at 10. I will have guests Viva Fry and Katie Passatney on the show to discuss this CBC fact check and why the government continues to go after individual Canadians, after their property rights, after their livestock, and just why do they want to kill birds so badly? We'll have some answers to those questions tomorrow. Thank you for joining me today. Have a great rest of your long weekend, Labor Day weekend. Can't believe it's the last day of August, but what a summer. Thank you so much. Bye for now. God bless this country. Godspeed to